Hi guys, my name's Seb Tudor, I'm the man on the Silver Mountain, and welcome to July's month in review. And we've got some interesting stuff to talk about today, but the first thing that I want to talk about is actually one of the stories that I've already covered in its own video. I'll leave a link in the description. And that is the case around Charlie Gard, which has finally come to a close with the courts kind of completely agreeing that the NHS doctors were right, and that unfortunately Charlie has to die in their care, and so on and so forth. Especially considering that the parents have proven themselves unreliable and to an extent self-interested. And the thing is, then though, we had this statement come out from the parents, and it was all done, it was all left this way. The reason why it ended and was concluded now was because there were some more results that came out that demonstrated that the damage, especially the damage to his muscles and things, was irreversible and couldn't be turned around. And the unfortunate thing is that then the statement came from the parents whereby they were going, oh well, if the doctors had just let us do this earlier, then our boy would have been a happy, healthy little boy. Firstly, that's bollocks. The condition that Charlie has is so pervasive and so all-encompassing throughout his entire body, from his brain, where he's suffering from epileptic seizures, through to his muscles where they're not working at all, to the fact that he's been suffering like in complete silence, locked away, and he's unable to move and breathe by himself at all. It's his cells were shutting down. His cells themselves were breaking down. It's a mitochondrial disease. There's a mitochondria in every single cell in your body, pretty much. And so as a result, yeah, he was... They could have improved his condition, maybe. 10% chance was the to me optimistic sounding figure from the specialist that was offering the treatment from the States. And yet he wouldn't have ever been a happy, healthy baby boy. He wouldn't have ever grown up to be a normal child. This wasn't some miracle cure. This unfortunate condition that Charlie has, or had, depending on when he unfortunately ends, regardless of which way round it goes, this kid was never going to grow up being healthy and happy without challenges. Yeah, that was always going to happen. He was always going to be in, maybe not the worst way, but in a bad way. And I'm, as I've said before, that I'm surrounded by nurses. As I actually said in that video, I'm surrounded by nurses. Both in terms of family and friends, and they are all looking at this going, all those doctors, all those nurses, all those people that tried their hardest to look after Charlie did their utmost. And they ignored the parents because the parents weren't looking at Charlie's best interests. They would have, just for their own interests of having their child around, would have kept him around in spite of the advice given by medical experts or anything else, purely for their own gratification. And then it came to their statement, where they actively shit on the doctors and nurses that cared for them, cared for their child. And it's just being used to attack the NHS. And I feel this is kind of disgraceful. You've had vultures from organisations that had no real reason to stick their nose in. The Catholic Church, who have a terrible record in regards to to health and reproductive health and looking after people, they're swooping in on ideological grounds. You've got Trump going, oh, look at the poor baby, when Trump is actually going to, and his policies are likely to generate more abortions than proper sex education in the States would cause. And so as a result, we've got this system in this country. And don't get me wrong, the NHS has taken blow after blow and is poorly managed, underfunded, and horrifically set upon by the current government, especially, who are looking to just stealthily sell the NHS off to private firms who then can't cope with what people need. But it's still a system that we've had in this country for a very long time. And it's a system that has stood out time and time again on the world stage as being a great example of kind of socialized healthcare, of making sure that the people of the country invest in the health of everyone in the country to enrich the country as a whole. And seeing this one case, when, as I said in the video that I did on this, there are kids suffering from these kind of conditions all over the country. Most of them aren't in the news. Most of them don't get ever heard of. Most of them, unfortunately, leave the parents just as devastated as Charlie Gard's, but they don't get support in terms of millions of dollars donated to them from strangers. They don't get press attention. They don't get offers from the President of the United States or the Pope in regards to assistance. They don't make such a big deal of it that it has to be taken through the various courts to actually kind of reach a resolution. And so it's considering the amount of time and effort and hardship that these parents have caused everybody involved, including themselves. Like, seeing the people jumping on and complaining about the NHS, complaining about the way that this was handled, arguing that this demonstrates how, we need to make sure that children are protected from our doctors. It's a madness. It really, really is. And it's not something that I feel should be allowed to happen. Like, if there are many reasons to attack the NHS, but this one situation where they did their job to the utmost, including looking out for the child and going through hell and high water against the parents to ensure that that child received the best treatment and was looked after in the best possible way for that child. Like, these attacks just, they kind of make me sick. Because we are a country that has this system in place. If you want to complain about the way that it's managed, the way that it's funded, the way that it's treated by the government, the way that people treat the system, the way that people don't necessarily use the system for the right things, all of that, fine. But when they have done their job and they have looked out for the life of an individual, regardless of family, regardless of anything else, they have taken the care of that one individual to heart and they've done their job, then you, like, attacking them over that is not, it's not productive. Like, these parents are probably going to complain and whine, and they're going to write a book and they're going to sell it and they're going to make even more money, and they're going to, like, ride this sad situation off into the sunset. But the system that we have shouldn't suffer as a whole just because these two individuals decided that they didn't like what was going on because life is unfair. But anyway, now that that's out of the way, let's talk about some stuff that's maybe a little bit more interesting. We'll kick off with Brexit, because Brexit's always fun, right? And it's where I am and it's what I'm looking at. So we'll go with that next. The next couple of things from Brexit. First off, we've got a whole load of more kind of interesting information and commentary going on about how the negotiations are going, or not, as the case may be, where you've got our own government attacking each other over things. We've got them making a mess of stuff. We've got, especially the single market, you've got the various parties not knowing what the fuck they're talking about. You've got Jeremy Corbyn making stupid statements about the single market that are just plainly false. You've got other members of the Labour Party writing articles in various papers about how, Brexit is a good thing, when the more data that comes out about it, the more it demonstrates that it isn't, or isn't likely to be. You've still got people saying that we will have more control after Brexit than we do now, which, again, if you look at it, is completely false on several points. We will not have control over any of our additional trade outside of our country to the EU. We will still be under the heel of a different organisation that isn't the UK in regards to general trade, if we go for the World Trading Organisation kind of route afterwards. We are going to lose out to much larger countries. Our trades, the suggestion of trade with the United States is great, sure, why not? But at the same time, America has already demonstrated that they're more interested in trade with the EU, which isn't surprising considering the EU is the largest trading bloc on the planet, and is ultimately the largest economy on the planet as well. And so seeing that all break down, and people still going, we'll have more control. Yeah, we'll have more control over a country that's failing. And we won't have more control over our borders, because things like freedom of movement didn't actually really have anything to do with our borders so much as it did in regards to opportunities generally, because it was still something that was regulated around. You could still quite happily prevent the flow of migrants while still maintaining freedom of movement, because they are not the same thing. We aren't going to be losing or gaining access to anything that we control that's going to make a big difference, but we are losing access to things that are going to be hugely important, and so on and so forth. But there is arguably still hope. The Labour Party coming out and saying that their attitudes are kind of open and mobile, but also looking at the first steps towards Brexit have been the repeal of part of what they wanted to do what they suggested they were going to do in the first place, and how the discussion is going to form around potential further revokes and repeals around what they set out to do to begin with. And you've even got industries talking about abattoirs and food hygiene standards and kind of animal welfare side of things within the UK, which is something that has come up recently, because we'll trade with kind of food produce and other things with the United States, then with New Zealand and Australia, and those are the things that have kept coming up as ways around us losing all the trade from the EU. And yet, apparently, if we most of the people that we're overwhelmingly reliant on, was the quote from individuals presenting to the Lords EU Environment Committee, and they've said that it's around 90% of slaughterhouse vets and slaughterhouse workers and animal welfare individuals, both within the food industry and outside of it, are all EU nationals. Overwhelmingly reliant on EU workers was the quote. And so all those people who have been saying that, yes, we're going to go and do all this trade with other people for this, that and the other, Well, that's fine, but the people who are propping up those industries that you are hoping to trade from to continue to support the country are disappearing with these EU nationals that we are supposedly either trying to get rid of or trying to prevent entering the country. But speaking of EU migration, Amber Rudd, the Home Secretary, announced the other day that now she wants a full analysis of EU migration a year after the referendum. And lots of people have been saying that it's, oh, well, that's a year after the referendum. The referendum's already happened. Why wasn't this done beforehand so that you had the information to inform people on? And it's like, well, yeah, but that wouldn't have served anyone's purpose. That wouldn't have served the Tory purpose of gaining more power and trying to appease people. It wouldn't have gained anyone any real leverage either for or against Brexit, because you had people who were going for Brexit running on emotion purely, and the people who were going against Brexit were talking the other side of the economic argument. They weren't talking so much about migration and freedom of movement, because the EU isn't as big a part in the kind of problematic side of that as it was labelled as. But then if those people at the time had turned around and gone, oh, well, that's the case, then it's not as big an issue as oh yeah, we're the ones that have said it was a big issue all the time. We're the ones that scapegoated the EU for the last several years. Shit. So now they're having to look at this review, though, this major investigation into migration from the EU, in order to lay the groundwork for their new immigration system. And yet here's the thing. They're doing this now, and what if the information demonstrates that they were wrong the whole time? That all of the fear-mongering, all of the complaints, all the upsets, all the problems weren't from where they said they were. You know, what does that mean for their new immigration system? What does that mean for Brexit? What does that mean for anything? How long is this investigation going to take? Because if it takes longer than 2 years, or if it takes longer than it takes for Brexit to happen, then what? But it's an upsetting and strange situation, considering that now they're going to put forward this independent review on for a full analysis of the economic and social contributions and the costs incurred by EU citizens in Britain. When we've already seen that actually, for the most part, EU citizens coming here have already had their education. They've already had, they bring money with them. And so as a result, they don't tend to be incurring additional costs. If they don't become a UK citizen and they stay as a EU national, then they have their EU health care card, which means that we reclaim the costs of their health care from their country. And if we haven't done that effectively, then that's as much our government's fault as it is theirs. But then, so where you know, the contributions coming in from those migrants are going to be far more substantial than the people who are here their whole lives, because, you know, I in paying tax and in paying my way, I've not recouped all of the money that would have been spent on me for my education, for my my time being a sickly child, any recent healthcare stuff, which I can't really think of much that I've had, to be fair, so there's that. But either way, the people who are born and bred here, even after a lifetime of paying tax and paying back in various ways, they're probably still not going to contribute all of what was spent on them. Especially considering that a lot of people are in the, as I've said, most people are between £15,000 and £17,000 earned a year. And so as a result, those people aren't, their contributions, considering that they're only taxable on about £5,000 worth of their yearly income, they're never going to pay back the hundreds of thousands of pounds that have been put towards them through their development. So overall, the largest cost to the UK in terms of population isn't the EU migrants who are coming in with their own education, coming in with their own bits and pieces, their own money, their own assets of various sorts. It's not them. It's the people who live here already. Which is a bit of a no-brainer, and I'm not necessarily directly comparing the two. But, again, it's a lot of issues with immigration generally all got lumped on the EU when the EU doesn't have a particularly large part in that. Just because the people who are coming are already educated, already going and doing things, or, you know, even if they're not very well educated, as was said a minute ago, you know, they're coming in and working in industries like slaughterhouses, where they're miserable jobs. No one necessarily wants to do those jobs long term. You know, my brother has worked in an abattoir, and it was a miserable fucking job for him. But he needed, you know, at the time it was a job for him. And so, you know, looking at it, the people that were working around him, an awful lot of them were kind of European migrants. And so as a result, yeah, those people are propping up certain industries, as well as coming in without a cost for us educating them, and without any other bits and pieces, and with assets of their own. It's not like we're bringing in a huge number of children, educating them, clothing them, taking care of their healthcare, and they've got nothing to their name from the EU specifically. That might be the case in certain, like with refugees or in certain other situations of immigration, but it isn't from the EU. And this is where my issue with a lot of the discussions around it are, because the EU's immigration figures and things have been lumped in with everyone else's, and that kind of bugs me in a lot of ways. But anyway, I've talked about Brexit now all the way through a lot of stuff that's happened, and I just want to touch on a few smaller stories now, including one that actually just sounded really interesting to me, one that means a lot to me because of the people that I've coached, and one that was just really weird that I wanted to share with you. First off, the one that's meant a lot to me in terms of coaching and around work that I've done, and that is that employment tribunal fees have been found to be completely unlawful by the Supreme Court in this country. And all I can say is thank fucking God, because the number of people who I saw who needed to go to tribunal, who I've coached, who I've worked with, who could go to tribunal, and who had to step away from it because the government introduced additional fees of up to of just over £1,000 in 2013. And so as a result, some of these people who had maybe weaker cases, but ones that still needed to be brought to the fore, they kind of stepped back and didn't do anything about it. And yet now, between kind of various organisations, including the Unison Union, the Public Service Union, as well as several others that have kind of jumped in on this and made a point around it, you know, it's now been found that these fees have been found unlawful. They've been found to just be a really shitty thing to do, and that they were unfair because, you know, they have allowed bosses who are breaking the law, and there are a lot of them, even if they're breaking the law in small ways, potentially that could really mess with someone. And so even these bosses that have been breaking, or companies that have been breaking the law, be it in small ways, be it in big ways, they've been allowed off the hook for the last few years completely because the badly treated staff, who are often on the lower end of things, so they don't have money either, they've just been told to like either leave or shut up, get out the way, or get with the program, when potentially they're being bullied, they're being abused, their contracts being ignored. And so now, though, thanks to this and this Supreme Court ruling, these fees, this £1,000 or so that people are being charged, have been found unlawful, and they are going to be removed. And thank God, because there are so many people that I've told, go to tribunal. Grab your contract, read through it, understand it. Grab your company handbook, read through it, understand the policies. If something doesn't add up, you take them to a tribunal and you get it sorted. Because otherwise, you, and potentially even if you leave, people after you are going to be fucked over and over and over again. And so, I'm really happy to see that this is the case, considering that just because of that money being thrown in there, that cost being thrown in there, the government statistics on it show that it dropped by about 80%. Like the number of tribunals being brought forward dropped by about 80% as soon as they brought those in. And it's like, think about how long that's been in place now. 4 years. Coming up on 5, kind of running into next year. And the number of people who will have had to just shut up and potentially taken abuse, bullying, their contracts ignored, screwed around by employers just because, had to leave jobs that they would have otherwise loved just because of one other person, had to find other ways to support their families because of the way that they were being forced to suffer. You know, it's a pretty horrific set of thoughts there, considering I've been witness to some of these things. I've been involved in coaching people who've had to leave work and tried to get back into other work because of stuff like this. You know, stuff that should have gone to tribunal, should have been tackled directly, you know. But it's a big win for workers. And it's a shame that it's taken this long to get to this point, but now that it's kind of been reworked so that it's open for people again, thank God, because again, especially young people who are being screwed around, yeah, I'm glad that this has happened now. You know, maybe those people that I've mentioned tribunal as an option to in the past, you know, maybe it's now a more viable option for them, considering money was usually one of the things that meant that it wasn't before. But anyway, now on to a couple of more fun-ish kind of stories. The first one is science, because, you know me, I love my science, and that is that researchers plan to go out to Zealandia, the sunken continent between kind of Australia and the Antarctic, and they're going to go down and drill. They're going to go down and like dig into the rock and sediment layers beneath the kind of current seafloor over this area, and they're going to dig down and find out kind of what it was like, what caused it to kind of shift in the way that it did. I mean, the suggestion is that it would be the Australia, because the Zealandia, the landmass kind of straddles the Australian and Pacific plates, and so there was about 50 to 80 million years ago, things started to shift around out there, and as a result, this landmass kind of fell beneath the waves. And at one point, Zealandia actually made up a connection between Australia and the Antarctic as part of a kind of larger, slightly separated landmass, rather than one that was several different continents. And so this lost continent, you've got these scientists going out there from the International Ocean Discovery Program, and they're going to drill at 6 sites to find out what's down there. And this is something that I'm going to be interested in taking a looking at, because the whole kind of the world progressing from kind of Pangea into numerous continents and tectonic movement and all that kind of thing, that kind of change and roll over time has always just been really interesting to me, because we can visualize it, we can see it, but we can't really imagine it because the world to us in our small, tiny lifespans seems so kind of constant and steady and kind of relatively immutable. You know, ice caps may melt a little bit, like the big ice shelf that fell off in the Arctic, that's around the size of, I believe, Delaware was what it was being compared to the most. And that's just floating around now. But again, that's not like a huge landmass, like, I don't know, the whole of Africa shifting like sideways across the ocean or anything. You know, it's something, it's this interesting place where we can visualize it and we can understand it, but we can't really think about living through it just because it takes so long to happen. And so, you know, finding out what's on this lost continent, you know, any things that they can find down there to suggest what kind of life developed there, what kind of environment was there, you know, what would have happened as this sunken continent actually started to sink. You know, because tectonic movement, it takes a while. I doubt this entire continent would have just gone. And so, you know, what happened to the life? What happened to the land mass as it started to sink, as it started to shift beneath the waves? You know, that's something in kind of seeing what they find out about. But anyway, guys, we got one last story to go through, and this one's both silly and kind of interesting and important. There's an artist in Japan who scanned her vagina and then 3D printed it onto the top of a canoe. There's a picture right here. Now, this in and of itself is a strange and interesting project to undertake. But at the same time, it's just a silly thing, right? It's just a daft project that's been undertaken, and there it is. It's not necessarily offensive. If you saw it at a distance, you'd probably think it was just a normal canoe. But she's now facing 2 years of jail time for the dissemination of obscene material or something to that effect. And firstly, this seems daft to me in the first place, considering the kind of place that kind of Japan is. But also at the same time, kind of, will this set an interesting precedent for other projects like this worldwide? You know, it's going to be a kind of really fascinating and interesting kind of thing to see how this case rolls out. Just because if she's convicted and jailed for 2 years, then what does that mean for any other kind of adult expression over there? And I'm not just talking about porn or talking about projects like this specifically, but obviously art is art. You know, people do all kinds of things with it. If you had someone going to Japan who wasn't Japanese, who wanted to use adult themes or elements in their art in conjunction with the Japanese aesthetics, the cityscapes, the rural areas, the old temples, the people, you know, then what would that mean for that individual afterwards? You know, it's been done in the past. I'm sure it'll be done in the future. Obviously, projects like this one here, where 3D printing has been used and it's been a kind of interesting project. I mean, lots of people are kind of attributing this to women's rights and stuff as well, but at the same time, I'm not too sure about that angle, because art could be anything. And the thing that worries me is that if this woman is jailed for just going, look at this art that I created. It's crazy art. It's bizarre, strange. No one else maybe would have thought about a vagina canoe as art in various ways. But, you know, she did. She made it. You know, it's an interesting idea. 3D printing, 3D scanning being used in art is only ever going to become more and more prevalent the more accessible the technology gets, it's going to be interesting, especially considering Japan is a very technologically kind of capable place, and they have an awful lot of tech over there that they use far more regularly over there than they do in other places. It's going to be interesting to see how this kind of pans out, because I'm hoping that she doesn't get put away for a long time or anything like that, because, again, this is art. There's no, she's not being overly salacious or anything like that. She's going, look at this cool thing I did where I was able to 3D scan part of myself and apply it to this thing that I do. Imagine someone really proud of their car 3D scanning their face and sticking it on the little angel on the front of a Rolls Royce or something like that, on the front of their car. Yeah? That would be basically what this woman has done. A 3D scan of a body part that's been applied to a thing that you use. You could slap my hand on a toaster. Whatever. I don't feel like this is anything to really make a fuss over, but it's something that could set a kind of worrying precedent for other people creating art or using technology within Japan. And also, if Japan does it, then potentially other countries will follow suit, and that's also worrying. But anyway, guys, that's all I kind of wanted to touch on for this month in review. Please leave me down in the comments anything that you think I missed. I'm always open to making more videos on the things that you guys kind of want discussed and want opening up and breaking down. So if there's anything that I've missed, then please leave me a note down in the comments there, and I'll maybe take a look at it depending on what it is. But otherwise, thank you very much for watching, guys, and I'll see you in the video tomorrow. Take care. Thank you very much for watching, guys. If you enjoyed this video, then please drop us a like, share this video, and subscribe for more. And I'll see you in the video tomorrow. Take care.